HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Vanishing at Smokestack Hollow. A missing family, a desperate plan, an unsolved mystery. By Jake Anderson. Read by Chris Abernathy. Prologue. In southeast Oklahoma, the floodplains and oil fields of Ironhead Country merge with the lake shoreline, meandering 800 miles in the shape of a gnarled shuriken. Under its spindly northwest arm, the reservoir cradles the sleepy terminus town of Eufaula. Highway 9 bypasses the Canadian River Junction and exits onto Honeysuckle Road, which cuts through a swampy scrubland of pin oaks, willows, and cottonwoods. Turtles nap on the denuded roots of cypress trees, and every so often they tumble and plop into the water, sending ripples to the shore. At sunset, mosquitoes and fireflies hover against indigo sky, and bullbats plummet into a blood-red horizon. The first evening breeze breaks the summer heat, stirring a timeless rhapsody of chirping crickets, buzzing cicadas, burping frogs, and the whistling bird-song of geese and whippoorwills. Honeysuckle dead ends just downwind from the town's solid waste transfer station, where on a June evening in 2009, the McIntosh County Fairgrounds hosted two separate gatherings. The first, a large riotous crowd of cowboys, rodeo staffers, and spectators flocked to and packed the Eufaula Roundup Club for a night of bull riding, mutton busting, and steer wrestling. Hints of manure and popcorn, along with the auctioneering prattle of the announcer, carried to the perimeter of the grounds, where the second, much smaller, more pensive group formed a line and disappeared into a squat white event compound. Flanked by two church elders, a portly, bespectacled pastor stood at the head of the gathering and allowed everyone to get settled on the rectangular bales of hay comprising the makeshift pew. Behind him, a banner read, Muskogee Seventh-day Adventist Church, proclaiming the three angels' messages. He asked about their doubts and fears, and then, introducing the Book of Daniel, reviewed scripture and literature from the Adventist org. Before Jesus' second coming, he is investigating the entire earth, everyone who has ever lived, every choice every human being has made. As he scanned the faces of the congregants, Alonzo took notice of a gaunt couple in their late 30s or early 40s, who, accompanied by their young daughter, observed from the back shadows. The dyadic intensity of their gaze momentarily caused the pastor to double back and lock eyes. God wants it to be clear to us, and to the watching universe, that not one person will experience a fate they did not choose. After the service, Brandon and Reeves collected sign-up forms and answered questions. As Pastor Alonzo shuffled around, chatting with the prospective parishioners, he noticed the couple, both skinny as rails, waiting to move up in a line to talk to Brandon. Lazing between and around their waists was a cherubic little girl with bleached blonde hair. There was something about the couple and their girl that caught the pastor's attention. He couldn't pinpoint what it was. A feeling of unease. When they reached the front of the line, Brandon had to lean in to hear them over the din of crosstalk. The couple took turns speaking, the man into his left ear and the woman into his right. After a few exchanges, the church elder glanced up, seemingly caught off guard by something that was said. As he moved closer to eavesdrop, Pastor Alonzo caught bits and pieces from the woman, whose wavy auburn hair concealed her eyes as she spoke. She said something about a dark presence, an oppressive force in their home. The man gave an animated description of seeing 3 or 4 of them on their roof at 3 a.m. Usually a pillar of forbearance, the elder looked increasingly uncomfortable with the conversation. The pastor moved even closer. The child, who had become restless, slid playfully into her mom's arms and began to softly sing. Sometimes they appear as children, the woman said, running her hand through the girl's blanched hair. Stormy speaks to them. She's my little indigo child. Part 1. The Mountain. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. Robert Frost, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Chapter 1. Footprints. For the Latimer County Sheriff's Department, the nightmare began late in the evening on October 17, 2009. Sheriff Israel Beecham, who was burning the midnight oil as per usual, took a break to bull jive with the handful of deputies still on duty. That's when the call came in. A deer hunter from Red Oak reported an abandoned truck left in a clearing on Panola Mountain. Probably a theft or a dead alternator, Beecham thought. He dispatched one of his deputies to check it out. Nestled within the densely wooded Sans Bois Mountains, Panola and its closest neighbor Red Oak originated as remote outpost camps for railroad workers in the 1850s. Neither town was developed with access points in mind. Navigating to a discrete location is difficult, even with precise directions and the aid of daylight. By night, forget it. No officer really wanted to traipse alone into the untamed wilds in the middle of the night. Earlier that year, in May, Sasquatch hunters in the nearby Kiamichi Mountains made headlines when they reported footprints measuring 15 inches long and 5 inches wide. The local history is rich with folklore about a tall, reddish-brown creature with big eyes who is said to make bird-like noises that mimic the whippoorwill and the owl. Deputies faced more tangible threats, of course, in stumbling upon a meth lab cook with nothing to lose. But cryptozoological mysteries are a tradition in these parts, a veritable tourist industry for some towns, and the stories cascade down to each successive generation of children. At the base of the mountain, Deputy Ferguson met the deer hunter who called in and followed his truck up into the dark abyss. "You'd have never found it otherwise," the man told him. After weeks of rain, muddy debris and disgorged thicket formed a thick blanket of earthy gruel over the slopes. Ferguson ascended the roads carefully, hugging a seemingly endless succession of tight switchbacks in a spiraling orbit up and around the cliffs. With little moonlight and a thick mist descending, he could see only the wispy spectral patterns illuminated by his low beams. 8 miles later, his guide pointed him down a narrow, pitch-black path, then turned around and left. His red tail lights gradually disappeared. Ferguson took a dirt access road that was more like a mud flow and entered a clearing. Flipping on his cruiser's high beams afforded a slightly enhanced glimpse of the extent of his isolation. This was what people meant when they said the middle of nowhere. As he stepped out of the cruiser, his eyes caught something ahead, a faint prismatic gleam like pixie dust or pixelation puncturing the blackness. The deputy pointed his flashlight into the gloom and saw rear retroreflectors. About 30 yards down the road, banked against the bluff near the clearing's unmarked egress, sat the abandoned truck, a white utility pickup, just as the deer hunter reported. Pausing, he shined his light up at the rock face of the bluff overlooking him, and then back to the clearing, where he caught something else in the near distance. The garbled frame of a junkyard vehicle covered in graffiti and occult symbols. Ferguson proceeded on foot, watching as his once shiny county-issued loafers were covered in mud. When he turned his light back to the truck, now only 20 yards away, the deputy thought he saw movement in the rear window. A stirring so slight and ephemeral it might have been a perceptual artifact, or his eyes adjusting to the dark. He focused squarely on the window for 10 seconds. When the movement did not repeat, he cautiously approached the rear of the truck. Projecting the white fluorescent beam of the flashlight into the cabin with one hand and cupping the other over his eyes, he leaned in close enough that the tip of his nose touched the glass. At first, there was nothing. Then the deputy heard a bleating sound, a guttural moaning, as something eclipsed his light. For a timeless moment, a feral, glowing eye stared through him. While his deputy was reporting to the scene, Beecham received a second call from the Red Oak man, who had returned from the mountain to clarify his initial report. He'd notified a nearby landowner about the location of the abandoned truck, and this man remembered seeing a family of 3, 2 adults and a child, with the vehicle a week earlier. Beecham thanked him, and then answered the call from Ferguson. What the deputy said changed Beecham's calculus. The situation appeared to be more complicated than he originally thought. The sheriff left one deputy to tend to the fort and told the other 3 to follow him to Panola Mountain. On the way, he had his deputy back at the office run the license plate number of the truck. Beecham led his small caravan off Highway 2 into Wilburton and onto a back road, ascending into the high sticks of the Red Oak area. When the troop reached the clearing on Panola Mountain, they inspected the partially shattered cabin window. Ferguson sat on the ground, hunched over. The deputy held in his arms a small, emaciated dog, which licked his face weakly. When Ferguson called and told him there was a dog in the truck, there wasn't much of a choice but to authorize breaking the window. Beecham was reluctant to enter a locked vehicle without probable cause, but the deer hunter said the truck had last been seen there with the family a week earlier. If the dog had been trapped inside this whole time with no food or water, which by her behavior appeared to be the case, it was a miracle she was still breathing. Beecham opened the cabin door of the truck and shined his flashlight inside. There was nibbled feces on the seat, and a cooler with a tiny bit of dirty water at the bottom. At around 11 p.m., Colton Mangum's phone rang. It was a Saturday night, and the high school linebacker was spending the night at his buddy's house. A call from the McIntosh County Sheriff's Office was about the last thing he expected. "You Bobby Jamison's boy?" the sheriff asked. "Yes, sir," Colton replied. "He's my stepfather." The sheriff told him that a truck registered to Bobby had been found abandoned. "Do you have their phone number?" Colton gave him Bobby's number, as well as his mother Sherilynn's number and the landline. The call abruptly ended, and Colton sat there, wondering what his family had gotten into now. A short while later, the sheriff called back and asked Colton if he would try calling his mom and stepdad. He did, got nothing, and told the sheriff as much. "We're going to send a deputy to check their home. Is their primary residence still off Texana and Eufaula?" "Yes, sir." "Is that where you live too, son?" "No, sir. Not anymore," Colton replied with a lump in his throat. The deputy heard only the sound of crunching gravel as he drove through the darkness of a flat backcountry copse, arriving at a remote vista of houses overlooking Eufaula Lake. The neighborhood was part of a small community in a secluded town, where folks generally frowned upon midnight welfare checks by the police, a fact that did not escape the deputy as he pulled within view of the Jamison home and stopped. A plume of dust rose in the glare of his low beams. Framed against the black expanse of sky and water, the scene unexpectedly lit up as several lights in the house were on, shining through drawn curtains. The deputy approached the front door and knocked several times, then waited, listening for footsteps. He knocked again, louder this time, and rang the doorbell. Nothing. Despite the electricity surging through its rooms and hallways, the place appeared devoid of human life, a conclusion he radioed back to the McIntosh County Sheriff. On his way out, the deputy briefly glanced around the property, looking for any obvious signs of suspicious activity. At the corner of the yard touching the dust road, the contours of a dark object took form, visible only as a large geometric shape looming in the empty night. He approached, stopping a few feet from a large moving container. Swirling black lines came into view, obscured by the blinding sheen of incandescent light reflecting off metallic alloy. Someone had tagged the side of the container with spray paint. He read one of the bulkier messages slowly, as though it were an ancient cave painting, tracing each character with his flashlight as he traveled the length of the pod. 3 cats killed to date by people in this area. Witches don't like their black cat killed. The last known point. The clearing on Panola Mountain was a well pad, one of the few spaces in the area not ensconced in thick vegetation. Like the rest of the mountain, it was accessible only by a narrow, unpaved oil and gas access road, a relic of Oklahoma's 20th century petroleum boom. The truck had come to a stop near the end of the clearing, nose down on a slight incline with 3-foot rivets of sludgy ground soil enclosing both the driver's and passenger's sides. Not an ideal place to stop and stretch one's legs. There was nothing on the ground around the vehicle. The tires had air. There were no footprints, no signs of damage, broken glass, or blood in the immediate area. There was no evidence that any kind of struggle had taken place, nor was there any indication of a maintenance issue with the vehicle. Officers took inventory of the truck's interior. They found billfolds, a purse, jackets, a map, a GPS device, and a couple of cell phones, all splayed in a pile. The IDs in the billfolds belonged to Bobby Jamison, to whom the license plate was registered, and Sherilynn Jamison. Records showed the two had a 6-year-old daughter named Madyson, and objects in the vehicle, including a life-sized Barbie doll, indicated the presence of a child. Clues. The scene suggested the family had meant to return to their truck, but for whatever reason, didn't. The most immediate logical explanation available was that they had stopped to travel by foot and gotten lost. Using the family's cell phones and GPS device, deputies reconstructed their last logged movements. The data drew Beecham and Company about 100 to 200 yards north, through trees and vegetation so thick they couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. As deputies called out to the Jamisons, their visibility was limited to awkward glimpses of colleagues crashing through the wet foliage and fumbling with their flashlights. The small troop reached a hill and began to ascend it. Halfway up, they saw footprints. Small ones, the unmistakable impressions of a child's shoes, that tapered off quickly, dead-ending at the rocky plateau at the top of the bluff. Later, in the early morning hours, deputies found an image on one of the family's cell phones. It showed a young girl, presumably Bobby and Sherilynn's daughter Madyson, standing alone. The scenery around her, boulders, trees, maroon and green leaves, and pine needles, resembled the bluff at the top of the hill where they spotted the footprints. In the picture, the little girl's bleached blonde hair flowed down over her shoulders. She wore a light-colored t-shirt and blue jean trousers. Her eyes peered into the distance, mouth open, exposing her missing front baby teeth. Her arms were crossed in a kind of anxious self-hug, with her right hand grasping her left elbow and her left hand holding her right bicep. She was either standing or mid-step in what appeared to be a candid picture. Unposed, unplanned, and unnerving. As the first inkling of dawn touched the overcast mountain, Beecham stood alone, assessing the truck from a new angle on the clearing. Something was off. A shadowy figure silhouetted against the sky approached him from the direction of the truck, where the deputy's activity had intensified. "Sheriff, I think you need to see this." "What is it?" Beecham followed him back over to the truck. "We found something underneath the floor compartment. There is a substantial amount of money in this vehicle, sir." As he parted the silent gathering of deputies, a shrill, cold wind picked up around them like the atonal swell from an orchestra pit. It stopped as suddenly as it started, and a stillness descended. Beecham's eyes lowered to the surface of the back seat, where stacks of cash spilled out of a bank bag. Chapter 2. The Search. As the morning of Saturday, October 18, 2009, broke over the mountain, Latimer County deputies got their first daylight glimpse of the truck and the clearing on which it had been abandoned. The cold rain persisted, and more fog rolled in, smearing the tree line into a spectral blur. Upon seeing the money, which amounted to approximately $32,000, Beecham ordered everybody to step back to prevent contamination. He had the area taped off as a potential crime scene. "In the backwoods of southeast Oklahoma," Beecham later remarked, "when a sheriff finds that much money, his mind automatically goes to drugs." He found it very unlikely that the adult Jamisons would have voluntarily walked away from their vehicle when it contained this kind of money, not to mention their dog. But there were no signs of a struggle or foul play, which typically leaves behind physical clues or trace evidence. The police eventually confirmed that up to a week or more may have elapsed between the time that the Jamisons were last seen and when the truck was reported. Plenty of time to clean up any incriminating artifacts. But if the Jamisons had been the target of a crime, why did the perpetrator leave behind their truck and the loot? Beecham began reaching out to family members of the Jamisons, delivering the kind of cryptic news one hopes to never receive from a law enforcement officer. He also contacted the Latimer County Emergency Management, which enlisted the help of all the local fire and forestry departments, as well as emergency medical services, EMS. As word spread that a family was missing, searchers and law enforcement officers from other agencies and counties began arriving, as did local residents, some of whom showed up on four-wheelers and ATVs. What the volunteers lacked in formal search and rescue experience, they made up for with their familiarity with the area. This was important because, in addition to the chilly temperatures, heavy rain, and poor visibility, searchers faced a vast, treacherous, and labyrinthine terrain. Several canine teams arrived, both live scent tracking and human remains detection, HRD. The tracking dogs were given items from the Jamisons' truck to help them establish a scent. The HRD, or cadaver dogs, searched for the scent of human decomposition. The first dog to get a hit led his handler on a mad dash through the rainy, uneven forest. Several more dogs lit out in other directions, sniffing and yipping. Their paths eventually converged in one location. The aspiring marshal. On his one day off, Reed Hogan received an early morning call from a Latimer County deputy requesting his assistance on Panola Mountain. They needed as many trained investigators as they could get, as well as his truck's flare unit. Reed lived just southeast of Tulsa, in Tahlequah, about 2.5 hours away from the mountain. He made it in just over an hour, blaring his emergency sirens and whatever hard metal he could find on the radio. As soon as he reached the base of Panola and started his ascent, it became clear how challenging a search operation here would be from a logistical standpoint. The only throughway was a single one-lane access road covered in thick mud. Without his Tahoe's four-wheel drive, there's no way he would have made it to the top. When he reached the clearing, he saw a number of other vehicles and about 50 people already on site. One of them, Sheriff Beecham, walked in his direction. "Sheriff?" Reed said, nodding. "Get to work," Beecham responded without stopping. The situation, Reed learned after asking around, was grim. If the Jamisons were out there alive, a big if, considering how long they had been missing, they faced the risk of dehydration and starvation. Perhaps even more urgently, the longer they were exposed to wet, cold conditions, the greater the chance of hypothermia. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, hypothermia is responsible for an average of 1,301 deaths per year in the United States, based on data from 2011 to 2015. Even in non-freezing temperatures, hypothermia can incapacitate a healthy person in short order, especially in rainy conditions. Lost person behavior. Compounding the direness of the situation was the child, Madyson. It made one hope, however naively, that the Jamisons had found refuge in a cave and built a fire. But this was a cinematic image of survivalism that experienced searchers say rarely plays out in reality. When lost in the raw elemental forces of nature, most people struggle to carry out even the most basic steps that could optimize their chances of rescue. This is due to what is colloquially known as woodshock. Unlike the grids of our cities and districts, the forest wilderness lacks any defined paths, edges, or nodes. Like a fog or whiteout, this miasma untethers us from spatial reality, scrambling our cognitive maps. The realization of being lost activates an evolutionary trigger that makes it nearly impossible to stay calm or still. Primal recall, fueled by what search and rescue expert Robert Coster calls a full-flown fight-or-flight catecholamine dump, mandates that we move. Being lost in the woods, even for a few moments, conjures a physiological flashback to one of our most ancient collective traumas, when prehistoric humans were hunted by animal predators. The trigger deprives us of the ability to reason or recognize spatial cues, so we're lost and moving without any sense of direction, getting more lost with each passing moment. The best thing to do in this situation is to simply stop and stay in one place. But as the panic accelerates and the urge to extricate oneself from the wilderness intensifies, lost people often make their situation worse by trying to cover more ground. Eventually, as their blind arcs incrementally bend, lost persons begin to unwittingly travel in circles. This little piece of search and rescue folklore has been borne out in studies. Researcher Jan Suman took volunteers to Germany's Beanwald Forest and the Sahara Desert and used GPS devices to track their efforts to walk straight. The results confirmed that without access to spatial signifiers or external cues, such as cloudy days or moonless nights, people can't travel on foot too much more than 100 meters from their starting point, no matter how long they walk, because they're moving in circles. This inherent tendency to arc is the result of an accumulation of many small orientational and navigational misjudgments. Fortunately, thanks to the effort of search and rescue teams, the vast majority, over 90% of lost and missing people, are found. But it's a time-sensitive enterprise if ever there was one. Data from the International Search and Rescue Incident Database, ISRID, shows that lost persons who aren't found within the first 24 hours have a 25% fatality rate. After 51 hours, just over 2 days, only 1% of lost persons are found alive. The Jamisons were on day 10, and searchers knew little to nothing about their condition. Were they mobile? Were they trapped or incapacitated? Were they responsive, injured or sick, despondent or experiencing mental illness? It's not impossible for a lost party to be rescued after such a prolonged period of time, but it's rare. Scent work. Reed ventured off the clearing into the forest to test his Tahoe's flare rig. He quickly learned that the terrain made off-road driving impossible. He would have needed a tank to scale some of the boulders, a flying tank to traverse the ravines. The lighting rig was a bust, too. The mountain's dense foliage absorbed photons like a coal trap. The flare's pyrotechnic luminance offered little more than disco ball shimmers of fuchsia on the understory. But he was still determined to help. Reed worked for the United Ketua Band Tribal Agency, doing mostly data and DNA collection. The tribe had a cross-agreement with the U.S. Marshals Service, and once a week he got to go into the field and observe cases being worked on by marshals. Every 2 weeks, he assisted them as they checked in with parolees. There was a clear pipeline between his job and the U.S. Marshals, and if he played his hand right, that was a career path that was available to him. This day, he realized, represented an opportunity to both help people and prove his investigative mettle to state law enforcement officials. At the very least, it beat data entry and compliance rituals with convicted sex offenders. Reed assisted a canine tracking team that consisted of Betsy and her golden retriever, Hazel. Betsy was a short, heavy-set woman with wise, expressive eyes and over 20 years of experience in search and rescue. Hazel was 5, still a puppy at heart, but a seasoned pro at tracking. They started at the truck, the family's last known point, and strafed laterally along the bluff wall until they were traveling uphill and north from the well pad. Reed watched Hazel in amazement as Betsy gave a mini TED talk about
Sample complete. Ready to continue?